Ever since I was a little kid, I always loved the military. I loved the Army, and I think I always knew that I wanted to, join. I just said, I wanted to go and experience it, and just to serve my country. And then I went to the recruiter station. I said, I want to jump out of airplanes and ride motorcycles. And right then they said, we got a job for you, But, I did it and it was good. It was right after combat. So, I started getting these dreams and flashbacks and all that stuff. And then, kind of like big anxiety and all that stuff. And I went to my doc and they said, yeah, we got to get you some meds, and they gave me them, and, that was it. And you first start taking it, you feel great. Whoa. And then it just it's like you get immune to it, and then let's take a higher dose. Let's take a higher dose.
In my experience, I didn't see anything helping at all. I felt like it was making everything worse.
I gained how many, 40 pounds taking the meds. We looked it up, and that one med, I don't remember what it was called, but it said it acted like you had 1,500 calories every pill you took, and I had to take it 3 times a day.
If he missed a dose, then the whole family would know. The whole house would be kind of on edge because you couldn't talk to him. He would snap.
You take your meds and you can just start feeling it going down, and then you're just like, bam, and you're a zombie, It
almost seemed like he just didn't care about life anymore. He wasn't himself.
My body was breaking down, and my wife, she's all into herbs, and she's saying this isn't right. And then I was all fucking drunk, and the meds just taking that shit, and I just said, fuck it, I'm done. And I took my pistol and fucking put it in my mouth, and she opened up the door. I fucking took it, and I said, I was like, fuck it. I said, we gotta fucking do something, and this shit just didn't work, and
I had to literally grab the weapon away from him because it probably would have happened.
That's why I said, fuck it, I'm stopping. I'm stopping taking all this shit. It's killing me. It's gonna kill me, it's gonna kill my wife,
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't working, and something had to be done. I didn't want to lose my husband. I didn't want him to kill himself, and I didn't want to be killed as well in the process.
I knew I wasn't me. It was the drug that was doing it, and I knew I had to change or I'd be dead, and that's why I changed it.
There is a huge problem with suicides in the military. Since 2002, the rate in the U.S. ranks has almost doubled.
The suicide rate has really been going out the roof here lately with our military members, both while they're still in and once they return back to the States.
I would move from base to base to base, and I'd be on different missions at different times. And one minute I'm on a base and I'm having lunch, and I'm being asked, hey, did you hear about those 3 guys, those 3 soldiers who committed suicide?
It was a black eye on Fort Bliss. Soldiers were dying left and right. Preventable deaths, we're talking suicides, we're talking about these soldiers getting in their cars or motorcycles going 150 miles an hour and hitting a median. Family violence, it really spiraled out of control.
With all this happening, psychiatrists continue to hand out psychiatric drugs in volume, drugs well known to increase violence and suicidal thinking.
My psychiatrist at the time had issued me recommended gabapentin, and I took one, and I think within 30 minutes I had thoughts of suicide.
They started me on a really low dose to build it in my system, but even the low dose, I was still feeling side effects of suicide, depression, anxiety.
I did notice that there was a lot of times that I thought, you know, that it would just be better to be dead than to keep living like that. And I look back on it now, and I do realize that it was the meds.
Yes, there can be reasons for suicide in today's military that don't involve psychiatric drugs. But it would be stupid to ignore the drug's influence. Just ask the troops with boots on the ground.
I was military police, actively working as a police officer on the military installation. And in 1 week, I went to about 8 or 9 suicide attempts where the person either overdosed or, you know, said that he was going to kill himself, something like that. And 1 for 1, every single person was on psychiatric drugs.
Because of my role as a criminal investigator, I didn't witness the soldiers while they were taking psychiatric drugs. All I got to see was after the suicide or after the death, and then the reports come out. We'd get called pretty often to investigate. We would have an autopsy performed and would include a toxicological exam, which would determine any drugs in the system, and usually there was some type of drug. A lot of them were taking some sort of medication for depression or anxiety. There were a lot of suicides happening in the military, overseas in theater and back in the States.
From 2009 to 2012, more U.S. soldiers died by suicide than from traffic accidents, heart disease, cancer, and homicide. The U.S. Secretary of Defense called it an epidemic. So, yeah, it's a problem. Some have claimed that this is because of the stresses of war, but 85% of military suicides never even saw combat, and 52% never deployed. Meanwhile, the competence of military psychiatrists is never even questioned, and it's resulting in suicide attempts such as this one.
My son joined the Army. He wanted to make a career and become something. He was still sweet and more normal when he came back from Iraq, even though he had, nervousness in crowds and PTSD. He was not different in personality as far as, to that degree like what we saw later on the drugs.
And so when Michael said, hey, I'm having anxiety issues, I said, you need to go tell them. Well, and that's what really began his journey. That was the worst step, in my opinion, that we could have ever done. It started off with 1 drug and went to 2. With each successive symptom that he got a new drug.
And we noticed that he started to go down in personality. It wasn't our son anymore. It was, anger, slurred speech.
It was surreal because the person I was talking to wasn't even my son. He was unsure of himself. He didn't have any will to do anything. At one point, he had stopped brushing his teeth, drinking water, eating, because he didn't care. He didn't even know that he was that way.
And I researched and discovered that our soldiers were being medicated and that they were committing suicide from it. So I printed all my research out and I handed it to my husband. And I said to my husband, tell me what you think of all this research. And he came back to me and said, if my calculations are correct, there's a pattern here that matches our son's behavior. And if my calculations are correct, he's just about ready to commit suicide. I was in the dollar store and he called me and said, I don't want to upset you, but I want you to know Michael's okay, but he tried to kill himself. And he put 2 IVs in his arms and he bled out in the bathtub and he was drawing in his blood on the walls. He didn't even know he was committing suicide.
So his cognizance, his reason was already usurped by these pills. they take away who you are. And he wasn't the same.
We had the hospital check him, and they found at least 9 drugs in his system. And they're just the ones they tested for.
They were giving my son drugs that had black box warnings. Said, if you're under 25 and you're taking this pill, your risk of suicide is going up 50%. Risk of suicide. But they were still giving the pills.
What he went through was so horrific it's hard for him to talk about. But he allows us to speak because he wants to save his comrades. He wants to save others who are going through the same thing, who are being drugged with lethal cocktails.
Me speaking as Michael, knowing the things that he has said to others, he would say, stay away from the pills. It's a dead end.
Psychiatrists claim their drugs save lives, but they rarely discuss the serious risk of suicide. Why don't they? Because those black box warnings for 18 to 24-year-olds, that's the age range of nearly half of all deployed American soldiers. And yet, the use of psychiatric drugs in the U.S. military has soared 76% since 2001. That includes antidepressants that psychiatrists hand out to soldiers to prevent suicide.
There's no evidence that drugging stops suicide. The reason I'm saying this is because it is alleged that if somebody is suicidal, you should medicate them. Except there's no evidence that medicating somebody who's suicidal is going to prevent suicide. There's substantial evidence that many drugs actually promote suicide.
And last year, within the DoD, there were 349 suicides among military personnel. That's almost one a day, literally one a day.
That's more suicides than were killed in combat. And the military is very concerned.
In fact, in 2009, Fort Campbell, Kentucky was actually closed down by the base commander for a time because they were having just an inordinate number of suicides.
Suicides on Fort Campbell have to stop now.
The last I heard, the VA was getting close to 450 calls a day to their suicide hotline, which they set up years ago to handle the amount of veterans that have suicidal thoughts on a daily basis. 450 calls a day.
It's a problem that has echoed through the halls of government.
One of the biggest concerns I have about the military is the inordinate number of suicides that have taken place among active duty and those who've left the military.
3 years ago, I got Congress to hold hearings to examine the relationship between suicide and increased use of medications, and there was a direct parallel. The amount of suicides were increasing proportionate to the amount of medications being introduced.
So, do antidepressants cause suicide? Of course they do.
So, don't blame the soldiers. Don't blame the military as a whole. Blame the corruption of the military by the psychiatric industry that is peddling false, dangerous medicine, that is peddling a kind of modern-day quackery, calling it treatment but delivering suicide.
And as bad as it is in active duty, veterans have it far worse. They're killing themselves at a rate of 22 a day, 1 every 65 minutes. But do psychiatrists ever consider stopping the drugging? No. Instead, it's an all-out assault.